Welcome to the Britney Spears Book Club, where I'm reading Britney Spears' book so you don't have to. This is Britney Spears, The Woman in Me. For my boys, the loves of my life. In the prologue, she describes going outside and singing a lot as a child because she was trying to escape her alcoholic dad, and she was scared to go home. In the first paragraph of chapter 1, she says, quote, "No matter how bad it got there was an understanding to stay mute, and if I didn't, there were consequences." Chapter 1 outlines that she lived in a strict Southern household. She describes what it's like growing up in a small town where everyone knows everyone's business, and describes the first time she felt touched by music, which sparked her love for it. She said sometimes Lynn would hire a housekeeper when they were financially okay to do so, and the housekeeper would sing gospel music while she was doing the laundry. Quote, "The housekeeper sang gospel music, and it was literally an awakening to a whole new world. I'll never forget it." She goes on to explain how music is like an escape from reality for her, and also a way for her to express herself. She said at 8 years old, she was making music videos to Mariah Carey songs because she was like so into performing and singing. This chapter goes on to unpack who Lynn's parents were and who Jamie's parents were. So Jamie's mother was Emma Jean Spears, but they just called her Jean. So we're going to call her Jean too. Jean was married to June. Jean suffered child loss, and after, June sent her to an asylum. At the asylum, they put her on lithium. Jean ended up ending things at the child's grave site. This was in 1966. June had actually sent more than one wife to this asylum at some point, but she was the first one. She described June as nothing being good enough for him. He was very hard on Jamie growing up, and she goes on to kind of insinuate that Jamie is the way he is because June was the way he was. Here's a little something interesting about June. Quote, "June was an officer for the Baton Rouge Police Department and eventually had 10 children and 3 wives. And as far as I can tell, no one has a good word to say about him in the first 50 years of his life." Okay. She also says that June essayed Jamie's half-sister. So Jamie was 13 when his mom died. She says that she knows June as like a nice, sweet old man because by the time she was born, he had softened up. And Jamie ended up being the mean one because he would drink a lot, and when he would drink a lot, he would be really mean. Paraphrasing, of course. She goes on to talk about Lynn's family, and Lynn's mother's name was Lily. Lily and her family lived in London, but Lily met Lynn's dad during World War II because he was a soldier, and there was like a soldiers type dance, and she went to the dance and she met him. He brings her back to America, and she was super disappointed because she was going from the London life to the Louisiana country life. Grandma Lily sounded unhappy. Quote, "So my grandmother kept to herself, read a ton of books, became obsessed with cleaning, and missed London till the day she died." She said Lynn grew up with money because Lily had money. The last part of the chapter is a little confusing. I can't tell if Lynn was into Jamie or if Jamie was into Lynn. She says, "My father took an interest in her as well as he might." Goes on to say Jamie played basketball really well and that Lynn noticed that, saw him and said, quote, "Oh, who's this?" And wraps the chapter up by saying, quote, "But the honeymoon was over long before I came along." Okay, let's get into chapter 2. Chapter 2 is about her parents starting their life together. Once married to Jamie, Lynn's family cuts her off financially and she becomes poor. Then her brother Brian is born. Her dad has a series of jobs that he can't hold down because of his drinking. And she goes on to say that Lynn told her that Lynn's father passed away shortly after they were married. So that's Brittany's grandpa, Barney. He was in a car accident. And after that, Jamie goes on a bender. He misses Brian's first birthday. He misses Christmas morning. So then Lynn is like, "I ain't doing it." And she moves back with Lily and is going to file for divorce. But then June steps in and his new wife, and they convince her to get back with Jamie. And then for a while, everything was good. Jamie starts a construction business. He starts a gym. He starts making good money. He starts being like one of the well-off guys in town. They start having big crawfish boil parties. In regards to her parents, she says, quote, "I always assumed their secret ingredient for staying up all night was speed." Very next line, quote, "My mom opened a daycare center with her sister, my Aunt Sandra." Okay. She goes on to talk about the women in her family. Her Aunt Sandra had a baby around the same time that Brittany's mom had her. They were just a few months apart. She said they were like twins and like sisters. She never got to meet her grandmother, Jean, obviously, but she did get to meet her great-grandmother, Lexi. She said she was incredibly close with Lexi. Lexi did not like Jamie, so she would take Britney. They would spend a lot of time together. They would have sleepovers. Until one time, Lexi, when she was getting older, got in a car accident with Britney in the car. And then Lynn was like, you can't drive my kid around anymore. And that sounds like it was very traumatic. She felt like she lost the most important person in her life. It's kind of unclear to me how old she is during all of this. Based on the chapter that follows this, I feel like she has to be under 4 years old. But these paragraphs follow the paragraph that says she was just born, so I'm unsure. The end of the chapter says that she liked to hide in cabinets when she was a kid. Quote, hiding was one way I got attention. She also says she couldn't get enough of singing, dancing, and gymnastics. She said they had a career day at school and she wanted to be a lawyer, but all her neighbors and teachers kept just saying, no, you're Broadway bound. So she just embraced her identity as the, quote, little entertainer. So this is how the chapter ends. It says, quote, I wanted to hide, but I also wanted to be seen. Both things could be true. Crouched in the cool darkness of a cabinet, I felt so small that I could disappear. But with everyone's eyes on me, I became something else. Someone who could command a room. In white tights, belting out a song, I felt like anything was possible. Come back for chapter 3. Welcome back to chapter 3. So the entirety of chapter 3 is about her brother Brian getting into a four-wheeler accident when she's about 4 years old. What's interesting about this chapter is I have zero memory of being 4 years old, and she has a very detailed account of what happened to her brother. So that must have been a very traumatic experience. So the gist of the story is her brother Brian and some neighbor friends are playing with their four-wheelers in very tall grass, and they were trying to mow the grass over with their four-wheelers, but they couldn't see one another. So they had a head-on collision, and her brother got like crushed by the four-wheeler. She said he was airlifted out, and she has no memory of like when they got to the field on what happened. I think everything in it is just like what Lynn has told her, but it does sound like she had memory of like running up to the scene. So basically they found out what was happening because Lynn's friend Cindy came in the house screaming, like, Lynn, you have to come out here. She writes, quote, my mother and I started running. The road had just been repaved and I was barefoot, running on the hot black tar. Ow, ow, ow. I yelped with every step. I looked down at my feet and saw the tar sticking to them. She recalls Brian being in a full body cast in the hospital and Lynn bringing him like just an overabundance of gifts. It looked like Christmas every day, she said, because Lynn was just so happy that he was alive. She goes on to say that the family dynamic in that moment changed and that became Lynn's favorite. Quote, my mom catered to my brother because of guilt. She still defers to him to this day. It's funny how one split second can change a family's dynamic forever. She said the accident brought her a lot closer to her brother and that she would sleep in his bed at night because she just loved him so much and she wanted to show him so much love. When he came home from the hospital, he had to be in a special bed, so they put like a little mattress at the end of it so that she could sleep there too. And sometimes she would crawl in bed with him and just like hug him over his full body cast. Quote, once the cast came off, I continued to share a bed with him for years. Even as a very little girl, I knew that between the accident and how hard our dad was on him, my brother had a difficult life. I wanted to bring him comfort. She goes on to add that she slept in bed with him until 6th grade. Chapter ends with a short memory of her in a Mardi Gras parade with a golf cart filled with kids that was like way too overpacked with kids, and they were way too excited and driving too crazy, and they hit the car in front of them a few times, which got them expelled from the parade. Come back for chapter 4. This is chapter 4 of The Woman in Me. In chapter 4, Jamie starts heavily drinking again, and his businesses start to fail. Quote, I was particularly scared to get in the car with my dad because he would talk to himself while he was driving. I couldn't understand the words he was saying. He seemed to be in his own world. She goes on to say she knows why her father was heavily drinking. Quote, now I see even more clearly that he was self-medicating after enduring years of abuse at the hands of his father, June. She said, but at the time, she just didn't understand like why he was so hard on them. Quote, the saddest part to me was that I always wanted a dad who would love me as I was, somebody who would say, I just love you. You could do anything right now. I'd still love you with unconditional love. She said Jamie was mean to her, but way harder on Brian. But she said that Jamie would come home heavily intoxicated and then Lynn would get really mad and she would like yell at and scream at him all night long, even though he was completely unconscious. And then Britney would come out of her room and yell at her mom and just be like, please stop yelling. I want to go to sleep. But she wouldn't stop. She said that was kind of like the nighttime routine. In the daytime, it was like a lot better. And it was a place where her friends could come over. It was like the cool house. She said her mom was like the Southern mom that would always be gossiping and smoking cigarettes. She said, quote, she smoked Virginia Slims, the same cigarettes I smoke now. But she goes on to say that like no one really paid attention to her. And she was just constantly trying to get everybody's attention by like putting on a show. And Lynn would tell her to stop and be on her best behavior because they had company, but she just wanted to get everyone's attention. She said, sadly, like her father is the one that ruined everything. Like he would be the hardest on them. He would lose all the money. He would be drinking, but she would get mad at Lynn because Lynn would be the one that would be screaming all night long and she couldn't sleep and it would frustrate her. Come back for chapter 5. Welcome back to chapter 5. So chapter 5 starts out where she's 5 years old and she starts doing dance competitions. And she actually ends up winning the regional contest in Baton Rouge. Shortly after that, her parents see an advertisement for an open call for the Mickey Mouse Club. So they drive 8 hours to Atlanta so that she can audition. But the age cutoff is 10, and she lies and says she's 9, but she's really 8. So then they narrow it down from 2,000 kids to 1,000 kids. Kerry Russell was in that first group, but she says that Christina Aguilera and her got cut because they weren't old enough and they were told that they need to just like get a little older, get a little more practice and come back. But they did tell her that she should go work in New York and get an agent out there. They didn't do that right away, and they waited 6 months. So she goes back to Louisiana, 9 years old. Just reminding you, 9 years old. Starts waiting tables at a seafood restaurant. So then her parents get her a meeting with this lady. Her name is Nancy Carson, and she's an agent in New York. So she goes out, she sings for Nancy Carson. Nancy Carson's like, baby, we're going to sign you. And they do. They sign with her, and then they head back home. And shortly after they head back home, Jamie Lynn is born. After Jamie Lynn is born, Lynn has a postpartum hemorrhage that scares the daylights out of Britney because she's there and she witnesses the whole thing. This leads to Britney having like a big attachment to her mom and getting really nervous that her mom is going to leave all the time. So for the next few years, they become inseparable. Quote, I was a little girl with big dreams. I wanted to be a star like Madonna, Dolly Parton, or Whitney Houston. I had simpler dreams too, dreams that seemed even harder to achieve and that felt too ambitious to say out loud. I want my dad to stop drinking. I want my mom to stop yelling. I want everyone to be okay. Come back for chapter 6. This is chapter 6. This chapter opens with Britney being 10 years old and going on Star Search. So there's a little anecdote about Ed McMahon that I'd love to read you. So she passes round 1, but in between round 1 and round 2, Ed McMahon interviews her and the other kid that she's going to go against. Here's the interview. Quote, I noticed last week you have the most adorable, pretty eyes, he said to me. Do you have a boyfriend? No, sir, I said. Why not? They're mean. Boyfriends? Ed said. You mean all boys are mean? I'm not mean. How about me? Well, it depends, I said. I get that a lot, Ed said. So then she loses by a quarter point, and then Lynn takes her out for hot fudge sundae. She is obviously devastated. And her and Lynn start flying back and forth to New York, and she ends up landing an understudy role for a Broadway play called Ruthless. And actually, Natalie Portman was also an understudy. At some point, the main lead left, and she got to take over as the lead, but she said at that point, it was like such a grueling schedule that she was completely exhausted. Then it became Christmas time, and they were in this small New York City apartment, and there was this tiny little tree, and it wasn't like what she was used to, and she was like, we're going to spend Christmas like this? And then she quits the show, and her and Lynn go back to Louisiana. She said the best part of that experience was that she got to learn how to sing in a small theater, and now because she had that experience, she could audition again for the Mickey Mouse Club, which she does. And in the meantime, she just starts playing basketball at her school. She gets a crush on a guy that's a basketball player. And she ends the chapter by saying, it wasn't the same as being on stage in New York City, but under the bright lights of the court, waiting for the sound of the applause, it felt like the next best thing. Come back for chapter 7. This is chapter 7. This is the chapter we meet Justin Timberlake. So she books the Mickey Mouse Club. She describes the show as being like a boot camp for the industry. Quote, there were extensive dance rehearsals, singing lessons, acting classes, time in the recording studio, and school in between. She said the Mouseketeers immediately split into cliques. She said her, Christina Aguilera, and a girl named Nikki DeLoach all shared a dressing room. Just for context, this is Nikki. Quote, we looked up to the older kids, Kerry Russell, Ryan Gosling, and Tony Lucca, who I thought was so handsome. And quickly, I connected with a boy named Justin Timberlake. She said they were shooting in Disney World in Orlando, Florida, and Jamie Lynn came along and she was 2 years old. So I believe this is Tony Lucca for context. But if you ever picked up a teen beat, you might recognize him looking like this. She said she had a huge crush on Tony Lucca. One time he came into the girls' dressing room looking for a hat, and she said her heart fell on the floor. But what I'm about to read you is way more interesting than that. Quote, another time at a sleepover, we played a game of truth or dare, and someone dared Justin to kiss me. A Janet Jackson song played in the background as he leaned in and kissed me. She said the Mickey Mouse Club was a terrific experience, that she got her feet wet in TV, and, quote, performing on that show ignited me. But then the show ended, and most of the cast either went to New York or LA, but she was kind of like torn. She wanted like a normal life, but she also wanted to pursue the career, but they went back to Louisiana for a little bit, and she went back to school. Now this chapter is going to take a turn. She said for fun in 8th grade, Lynn used to take her to the beach in Mississippi, and they would drink alcohol. Quote, some of my best times with my mom were those trips we took to the beach with my sister. As we drive, I'd sip on a little bitty white Russian. She says they'd go to the beach, they'd drink, and they'd come back happy. Quote, by 13, I was drinking with my mom and smoking with my friends. Then she says at 13, she was already driving, and at some point she was driving the car. Lynn was in the passenger seat, and Jamie Lynn was in the back, no car seat, but she was buckled in. Her mom didn't know that she was smoking, and she must have smelled smoke. So she said, I smell smoke. Have you been smoking? And she said, no. But Lynn grabbed her hand to smell her hand, and then she lost control of the steering wheel, and they started spinning, and they hit a pole, and then Lynn was very mad at her. Okay. No one was hurt. I think it's important to say that. Lynn forgot about the cigarettes, so. Then she gets in trouble for smoking at school, on school grounds, but she gets out of it. Then she says she has a huge crush on a guy at school. She's like having a sleepover at her friend's house. She's asleep on the couch. She wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning. He's at the foot of the couch. He's just sitting there. Then he just starts making out with her. And then we quickly jump to, she starts dating her brother Brian's best friend. She's a freshman. He's a senior. And this relationship ends up consuming a ton of her time. She ends up like skipping school for him. She goes to school in the morning, and then she leaves at lunch, and then she comes back to school to get on the bus and go home, but she gets caught. The school calls Lynn. She ended up missing 17 days of school, and then she has to make it up. She ends up losing her V card to this guy. So her brother starts getting mad. He starts not liking this guy. He's like, no. And he catches Britney sneaking out to go see him, and he tells on her. And Lynn then makes her pick trash up on the side of the road as a punishment. At this point, Lynn meets Larry Rudolph at some point, and they, I guess, talk occasionally. And Larry says, send us a demo. So they do. At the same time, Justin and JC are starting NSYNC. And Nikki's starting a girl group, but they decide to go solo. She doesn't say here, but I think the band was Innocence. Larry plays the demo for a bunch of New York executives, and they're like, let's see what she can do. So she flies to New York, and that's how the chapter ends. What a chapter. Welcome back. We're on chapter 8. Chapter 8 is mostly about a bunch of music executives that she meets. She meets with Larry Rudolph, and he introduces her to a man named Clive Calder. Larry Rudolph, Clive Calder. Clive founded Jive Records. She really loved Clive. Like, she went on for like a few pages about everything she loved about him. The way he spoke, his tiny little teacup dog. She even talked extensively about his office. And then Larry Rudolph took her around town to all the big music executives, and she sang Whitney Houston, more specifically Whitney Houston's I Have Nothing. Such a good song. And Clive signed her immediately. Quote, and so I ended up getting a recording deal with Jive Records at the age of 15. But Lynn was teaching 2nd grade, and Jamie Lynn was really small, so they decided to let Felicia follow her around. Many of you may know her as Miss Fee. So her and Fee moved to New York, and then every day they're going into New Jersey and just recording. She was recording and working with Eric Foster White, who also worked with Whitney Houston. She adds in a little story about how she was working nonstop, and she finally was able to like attend a barbecue, something fun. So she got all dressed up, she's at the barbecue, and she accidentally walks into a screen door because she doesn't see the screen. So relatable, totally done it. Anyway, this embarrassed her so much that like 25 years later, she's still thinking about it, and she says that. Okay, so then the music executives tell her that they want her to meet a guy named Max Martin. Quote, you need to meet this producer from Sweden. He's really good. He writes cool songs. He had already done songs for Backstreet Boys, Robin, and Bryan Adams. So Max Martin flies into New York, and they have dinner. No people are involved. It's just her and Max at dinner. It's a real fancy restaurant. There's a candle. The candle gets knocked over by like the waiter and the entire table goes up in flames. Quote, Max and I look at each other in horror. We should go now, he said. He was magic and we started working together. So then she flew to Sweden and starts recording songs there. She says the night before she recorded Baby One More Time, she was recording so much that her voice started to get like raspy, but she liked that like sexy raspy voice. And she thought it made her sound more mature. Once all the songs were done, they're like, what else do you want to do? You want to dance? She's like, of course I want to dance. Actually, more specifically, she says, quote, do I want to dance? Hell yeah, I do. Come back for chapter 9. Welcome to chapter 9. So chapter 9 is all about the birth of the Baby One More Time music video. She said the label had this vision where they wanted her to dress up like a futuristic astronaut. And she said she was going to look like a Power Ranger. And she was not into that idea. So she pitched them an idea where she's like, I just think my fans are going to want to see me like bored at school. And then when the bell rings, we just start dancing. She said the choreographer had them moving so smoothly. And she also takes a little bit of a dig at LA dancers. Quote, it helped that most of the dancers were from New York City. In the pop dance world, there are two camps. Most people will say the LA dancers are better. No disrespect to them, but my spirit has always liked New York dancers best. They have more heart. We already knew. She said they rehearsed at the Broadway Dance Center, so she was already like really comfortable because she had worked there before. She said when the Jive Records executive Barry Weiss came in, she really turned up the show for him. And in the music video, they even made Fee the teacher. And there she is. She said the most fun part about doing that album was that music video. Quote, that's probably the moment in my life when I had the most passion for music. I was unknown and I had nothing to lose if I messed up. Then Jive Records sent her on those mall tours, and she hated that. She felt like she was pitching her music to people who didn't really want to hear it. And then Baby One More Time premiered 25 years ago yesterday, October 23rd, 1998. And then January 12th, 1999 is when the album came out. And they sold over 10 million copies. Quote, I debuted #1 on the Billboard 200 chart in the U.S. I became the first woman to debut with a #1 single and album at the same time. I was so happy. She said then things start moving fast. She goes on tour with NSYNC. And she gets assigned to her security guard, Big Rob. She says at this point she starts becoming a regular on TRL. Then Rolling Stone sends Dave LaChapelle to do a photo shoot of her. And I am sorry if I butchered his name. I'm not trying to. And this is the image. And Lynn wasn't having it. She was not a fan. Did I lose power? Yes, I did. Am I going to stop going? No, I'm not. The end of chapter 9 finishes off where she gets to meet Paula Cole. This is Paula Cole. And that's the end of chapter 9. Come back for chapter 10. Okay, your girl is fed and hydrated and ready to serve you chapter 10. Chapter 10 is a little bit about falling in love with Justin Timberlake. So Justin and Britney, they start hanging out a lot because she's on tour with NSYNC. Quote, pretty soon I realized that I was head over heels in love with him, so in love with him it was pathetic. When he and I were anywhere in the same vicinity, his mom even said this, we were like magnets. Now, this next part has been in the press a bunch, so you might already have heard some of it. We're just going to read it verbatim, okay? It says, his band NSYNC was what people back then called so pimp. They were white boys, but they loved hip-hop. To me, that's what separated them from the Backstreet Boys, who seemed very consciously to position themselves as a white group. NSYNC hung out with black artists. Sometimes I thought they tried too hard to fit in. Then she sets the scene where she's walking through New York City with Justin Timberlake and Fee, and they run into Genuine. Quote, Jay got all excited and said so loud, oh yeah, for shiz, Genuine. What's up, homie? It's a hard read. This feels like important context. And then Fee makes fun of him for that, and he just brushes it off. She also says on this trip, he bought his first T necklace for Timberlake, and I think it's this necklace. Of course, I had to use a Tiger Beat photo. It was my favorite publication. I would never make you squint. Also, it's important to note that this is the only T necklace I can find him wearing. I'm assuming it's this one, but I don't know for 100% fact. She also talks about them getting very different press. Quote, I couldn't help but notice that the questions he got asked by talk show hosts were different from the ones that they asked me. Everyone kept making strange comments about my breasts, wanting to know whether or not I had plastic surgery. She says this is where she starts running into Madonna everywhere, all over the world. And she speaks very highly of Mariah Carey. She said one time she knocked on Mariah Carey's dressing room at an award show. She makes it a point to say that 20 years ago, nobody knew what a ring light was. Okay, but Mariah did. Quote, and no, I can't just say her first name. To me, she's always going to be Mariah Carey. Same girl. Then she says, quote, meanwhile, I was breaking records, becoming one of the best female artists of all time. People kept calling me the Princess of Pop. She talks about how this is when she gets her first, taste of backlash. Goes to MTV. They start interviewing people down in Times Square, asking, about her performance. Some people said she was, not a good role model for kids. She said, quote, it shook me up, and it was my first real taste of backlash that would last for years. It felt like every time I turned on an entertainment show, yet another person was taking shots at me saying I wasn't authentic. She goes on to say that she then starts taking Prozac. And she ends the chapter by saying, quote, I was able to build my mom a house and settle my father's debts. I want to give them a clean slate. Come back for chapter 11. Let us talk about chapter 11. Okay, so chapter 11 starts out where she is at the 2001 Super Bowl halftime show. She said she did the show alongside, obviously, Aerosmith, but Mary J. Blige, Nelly, and NSYNC as well. She sang Walk This Way. And this is a better view of her outfit, which was a play on a football uniform, which she describes. She said she got to meet Steven Tyler right before and that his energy was incredible and he was an idol to her. At the same time, she makes it on the Forbes list of most powerful celebrities, and she landed the spot as most powerful woman. She said the following year, she would end up as #1 overall. She says this is when she realizes that tabloids are making full salaries off of her. She said she was almost single-handedly keeping magazines in business. Then she does the 2001 MTV Music Awards where she does the I'm a Slave for You snake performance. In my opinion, this was one of the most iconic performances of all times, and it looked absolutely effortless, but she actually was a little scared of the snake. She said when they practiced it, she tries to just look down and pretend it wasn't there. But this is what she writes about it. Quote, everything changed though when I actually had to do the song on stage with the snake. On stage, I'm in performance mode. I'm in a costume. There's nobody else there but me. Once again, this little munchkin came to me and handed me this huge snake, and all I knew was to look down because I felt if I looked up and caught its eye, it would kill me. In my head, I was saying, just perform, just use your legs and perform. A few days before September 11th, she does a performance with Michael Jackson, and then Pepsi hires her to do the commercials. She talks about a few different Pepsi ads that she did, but according to her, this is the one that started it. And then she films Crossroads, and she says, and you might already have heard this in the press, that she becomes the character and she can't separate her real life from the character. She writes about Justin's response to that, which was, quote, I took it seriously to the point where Justin said, why are you walking like that? Who are you? She describes it like this, quote, I ended up walking differently, carrying myself differently, talking differently. I was someone else for months while I filmed Crossroads. She said once the film was over, she randomly went to CVS with one of her friends to buy makeup, and they started talking in the aisles, and then all of a sudden she just snapped out of it and became herself again. She says she was relieved she didn't get the Notebook. Some of you may have seen her audition that's been circulating. She says she thinks if she had gotten that movie that she would have became the 1940s heiress every day and not been able to let it go. And that's the end of that chapter. Come back for 12. Okay, this is chapter 12. She starts out the chapter. She's touring in Brazil. She does a show. She skinny dips with her dancers. She goes on with her life. By spring of 2002, she hosts SNL twice. She played a butter churning girl at a colonial reenactment museum. She played Barbie's little sister Skipper. And she notes that, quote, I was the youngest person to host and perform as a musical guest in the same episode. She mentions that she's offered a role in Chicago and turns it down, and it's a big regret for her. She thinks she should have done it. She says, quote, but I was committed to not rocking the boat and not complaining even when something was upsetting me. At this point, her and Justin live together in a house in Orlando, and her family comes out to visit her, and obviously they bring Jamie Lynn. So they take Jamie Lynn to FAO Schwartz and buy her one of those convertible Mercedes fake kid cars, similar to this. And this is how she describes Jamie Lynn. Quote, that's how we all were with Jamie Lynn. You see it, you like it, you want it, you got it. As far as I could tell, her world was Ariana Grande's song 7 Rings Come to Life. I'm sorry, but that's an iconic dig. She says when she was a child, she liked Madame Alexander dolls, and she boasts about loving Justin Timberlake. Quote, that was a good time in my life. I was so in love with Justin, just smitten. And then she does a lot of talking about the iconic 2001 look that she did with Justin Timberlake, the matchy-matchy denim. This outfit, for context, but you already knew. She said she co-hosted with LL Cool J, Quote, I still couldn't believe that Justin was going to wear denim, and I said, we should match. We should do denim on denim. She said she kind of said it as a joke and she didn't think he would do it, but they went all in. She said the stylist brought the clothes to Justin and she was like, wow, we're really doing this. Quote, I get that it was tacky, but it was also pretty great in its way, and I'm happy to see it parodied as a Halloween costume. She said she heard Justin get some flack for it. And I guess he said, you do a lot of things when you're young and in love. And she said, that's exactly right. We were giddy and those outfits reflected that. I guess I should take this off now. So she talks about how she knew that Justin had cheated on her a whole bunch of times in their relationship, but she actually just overlooked it because she loved him and she thought they'd be together forever. One person she knew about was that girl from All Saints. And she says she even saw this article. She just overlooked it. She said there's another girl that's very popular, married with kids, and she just didn't want to out her. But she says she knew he slept around. She said she only cheated on him once, and it was with Wade Robson, and they only made out. Quote, I was loyal to Justin for years, only had eyes for him with that one exception, which I admitted to him. Then her and Justin get pregnant, and they decide not to keep the baby, and they do that at home. She says she has a lot of regret about doing it at home. It was incredibly painful, still very traumatic. She remembers everything about the pain. He laid with her on the bathroom floor. He played her some music. That wasn't really helping. And she said she was never the same going forward. She said the only people that knew about it were her, Justin, and Fee. And ends the chapter with, quote, I should have seen the breakup coming, but I didn't. Let me tell you about chapter 13. And it's all about Justin Timberlake breaking up with her. So chapter 13 is actually 1 page long, but it's separated into 2 pages. And the entire thing is about Justin Timberlake breaking up with her. She said he started to be standoffish when he started doing the album Justified, and she thought that was because he was using her as ammunition for the album. And that might have made it awkward for him to be around her. She said he then ends their relationship via text message. She doesn't say what the text message says. She said she received it while she was on set for Overprotected remix by Darkchild. She said she had to go out and dance, but in between takes, she was in her trailer, obviously upset. Quote, when he left me, I was devastated. And when I say devastated, I mean I could barely speak for months. Whenever anyone would ask me about him, all I could do was cry. I don't know if I was clinically in shock, but it felt that way. So she goes back home, and she couldn't talk to anyone, friends, family, no one. She said she would just lay in bed and stare at the ceiling. And then she says this, quote, Justin flew out to Louisiana to visit me. He brought me a long letter he'd written and framed. I still have it under my bed. And at the end, it said, it makes me want to cry to think about it. Quote, I can't breathe without you. Those are the last words in it. But she said she was still in a trance, and after reading that, she still couldn't speak to him. And boy, did that 1 page say so much. Come back for chapter 14. Do you want to talk about chapter 14? Okay, let's do it. So she was still in a contract, so she had to go back on tour. She was doing the Dream Within a Dream tour, and she said in the beginning she really liked it, but now she didn't like it so much. She said she was tired in mind and body. There's an entire page where she's just basically fantasizing about not being on tour anymore and not having to work and being able to take a break. She said in hindsight, she realized that she didn't take any time to heal from that breakup with Justin. She said she actually told people that when this tour was over, she needed a break, but that seemed to make everybody nervous, and then she quickly realized she wasn't going to get to go home. But after the tour, she actually went back to Louisiana to do a People magazine interview. I actually found the interview. This is the magazine. It's from September 2nd, 2002. You can pause to read it if you want. Also included this photo of her. You can also pause this to read it if you want. Jamie Lynn and Lynn are in this one. It also notes that the People magazine team searched her bag, but all they found was gum, vanilla, perfume, and mints. Then Britney talks about how Justin Timberlake's family was actually more of a family to her. Quote, part of what made that period of time so difficult is that Justin's family had been the only real loving family I had. For the holidays, the only family I would go visit was his. I knew his grandmother and his grandfather, and I loved them so much. I thought of them as home. My mom would come out and visit us every once in a while, but she's not who I went home to, ever. So at this point, Lynn has now divorced Jamie and is described as depressed and self-medicating. She said Jamie's nowhere to be found, and Jamie Lynn is acting like a biatch. She even says, quote, I'm not exaggerating. She says she feels like a ghost child because she can walk in the room, and Jamie Lynn's just focused on the TV, and her mother just completely ignores her. But then her mom dotes on Jamie Lynn and makes her milkshakes. Quote, I felt betrayed by how Jamie Lynn had changed. I'd bought a house for Jamie Lynn to grow up in. She was not exactly grateful for it. She'd later say, why'd she get us a house? Like it was some sort of imposition. But that house had been a gift. I bought it because our family had needed a new house, and I wanted her to have a better life than I had. So she said that trip home made her realize she didn't really fit in anywhere. And that's how she ends that chapter. Come back for 15. Let us begin our journey into chapter 15. Okay, chapter 15, she goes to Milan to visit Donatella Versace. She said the trip invigorates her. They drink wine, they have amazing food, they party it up. And obviously Donatella, she dressed her in something beautiful and sparkly. And she got to go to one of the runway shows, and Donatella said she could sing if she wanted to, but she declined. She said she didn't want to. So instead of singing, Donatella put on Britney's cover of I Love Rock and Roll. And honestly, I felt like you guys just really needed to see the dress. It's absolutely beautiful. She said she got to meet Lenny Kravitz. And then she meets some hot guy, and she's like, I'm going to take him home. So she gets him in the car. But shortly after he's in the car, he says something to turn her off. She said she doesn't remember what it was, but she was like turned off real quick. So she just made them stop and was like, get out. And she just leaves them on the side of the road. Quote, I'd made a bad mistake letting this stranger inside my car, and I kicked him out. She said now that she's a mom, she would never have done that. She would have just been like, I'm going to drop you off right here at this time. At this time, Justin Timberlake's releasing the Justified album, so he goes on 2020 to talk to Barbara Walters, and he plays her an unreleased song called Don't Go, Horrible Woman. She said the song seemed to be about her, and the lyrics were this, quote, I thought our love was so strong, I guess I was dead wrong, but to look at it positively, hey girl, at least you gave me a song about another horrible woman. Everybody's so creative. So, less than a month later, he releases Cry Me a River. Quote, I was described as a harlot who broke the heart of America's golden boy. The truth, I was comatose in Louisiana, and he was happily running around Hollywood. She goes on to say, quote, may I just say that on his explosive album and in all the press that surrounded it, Justin neglected to mention that several times he cheated on me. There's always been more leeway in Hollywood for men than women, and I see how men are encouraged to talk trash about women in order to become famous and powerful, but I was shattered. She said the thought of betraying him gave that album some sort of purpose. She said everyone felt sorry for him and everyone shamed her. She would go places, people would boo her. She went to a basketball game, everyone booed her. She said she didn't even bother to explain herself because no one would believe her now that everybody knew and believed his side of it. She said in regards to Justin talking about taking her V card, she actually did not care about that. She didn't want to play into this like innocent girl thing. That was like her label. She knew who she was and she was okay telling everybody. So she actually wasn't mad at him for that. She actually shouts out Oprah and gives her credit and says that Oprah told her that that was none of anybody's business. Britney goes on to talk about how her friend was dating Justin Timberlake's friend too at the same time. And they both kind of had a breakup around a similar time. So they go out to Arizona and have like a girls trip. And they kind of have like a spiritual moment driving in their convertible in Arizona together. And this is how she ends the chapter. There have been so many times when I was scared to speak up because I was afraid somebody would think I was crazy. But I've learned that lesson now, the hard way. You have to speak the thing that you are feeling, even if it scares you. You have to tell your story. You have to raise your voice. Who's ready for chapter 16? It's time for chapter 16. First line of chapter 16, it just talks about Justin Timberlake getting with over 7 girls immediately after the breakup. Quote, or so I heard. So then she sees a guy that she thinks is good looking. Turns out it's Colin Farrell. So what does she do? She decides she's just going to get in her car and she's going to drive to the movie set that he's in. And then the producer's just like, oh, you're Britney Spears. Like, come watch us make this movie. She actually says, like, I don't know what I was thinking. So then Colin approaches her. They have a conversation. They start to have a thing. It's like a 2-week fling, basically. She calls it a brawl because she said they were aggressively all over each other. So she goes to the movie premiere with him and she looks back on this and says this had to have been a full-blown pajama top and she just didn't know at the time. She said she got too attached to him too quickly because she was like so vulnerable after the breakup and then quickly hops into a story about how her and Natalie Portman threw a New Year's Eve party together. She said it took a huge amount of effort because actually she had terrible anxiety and then she goes on for several paragraphs to talk about her anxiety. And a lot of her anxiety just came from like people criticizing and talking about her. Then she describes how it was like painful to watch Justin Timberlake and Christina Aguilera on a cover for Rolling Stone. And this is that cover. And she said that Christina actually said that she thought Justin and Britney should get back together, but she said that was still hurtful because she just didn't want them talking about her. She said it was also confusing because there were other times where Christina Aguilera would say unkind things about her, and so this was kind of a nice thing, so that was confusing. So then at this point, she's living in New York City in an apartment, and she basically is isolating. She only sees security and fee, and that's it. And she never wants to leave the house. She says she's very comfortable at home. When she lived there, she does mention that she took an elevator ride, and there was a guy in the elevator that made her laugh, and that ended up being Robin Williams. Okay, so then Madonna visits her and comments on how beautiful the view in the apartment is, and goes on to praise Madonna on how confident and powerful she is and how that made her also feel confident and powerful. Madonna introduces her to Kabbalah. Quote, in many ways, Madonna did have a good effect on me. She told me I should be sure to take time out for my soul, and I tried to do that. She modeled the type of strength that I needed to see. There were so many different ways to be a woman in the industry. You could get a reputation for being a diva. You could be professional, or you could be nice. I always tried so hard to please my parents, to please audiences, to please everyone. She says that she thinks she learned helplessness from her mom. So then they decide to do the VMA performance, the infamous kiss. She said they actually always practice an air kiss, but she decided to just go for it. And then all that led up to them doing a collaboration, the Me Against the Music. Quote, Me Against the Music is still one of my favorite songs, and the collaboration with her is part of what makes it so memorable. Are you ready for chapter 17? Hi. Do you want to read chapter 17? Let's get into it. The chapter starts out with her saying she was very happy with the album In the Zone. Me Against the Music was the first single, and the second single was Toxic. She said Toxic is still one of her favorite songs to perform. To promote it, she went to New York City, and she said that she went out at night to all her favorite nightclubs, and they filmed a special called In the Zone and Out All Night. Now, in the previous chapters, we haven't seen much of Jamie. Jamie disappeared. But now in this chapter, he shows up, knocks at the door, walks straight past her when she opens it with three people she doesn't know. All men. They sat her down on her sofa and started peppering her with questions. She said she was mute and she wouldn't talk to anyone. And a day later, she gets a call telling her she's going to be on Diane Sawyer. So let's read some of it. It says, I'd often retreat to my apartment to be alone, and now I was being forced to speak to Diane Sawyer there and cry in front of an entire nation. She said the questions were embarrassing, and she felt that she was too sensitive for this type of interview. Quote, I didn't want to share anything private with the world. I didn't owe the media the details of my breakup. I shouldn't have been forced to speak on national TV, forced to cry in front of this stranger, a woman who was relentlessly going after me with harsh question after harsh question. Instead, I felt like I had been exploited, set up in front of the whole world. She said this interview was her breaking point. So she goes back to Louisiana for the holidays. And there's a guest house in the back behind Lynn's house. And she's there with her friends, and Lynn keeps complaining about how loud they are. And she says, quote, it suddenly hit me that I had enough money that we did not need to stay in Louisiana. And I booked us a trip to Las Vegas for New Year's Eve, and some friends from my tour joined us. And although she does not mention him, this is the infamous Jason Alexander weekend. So before she marries him, she hangs out with Paris Hilton for a little bit. They party it up. They just have some innocent fun. Then she says this, quote, as a 20-something will do after a few drinks, I wound up in bed with one of my old friends, a childhood friend who I'd known forever. She doesn't remember most of the night, but then they go to a chapel, wait online, and get married. Quote, people have asked me if I loved him. To be clear, he and I were not in love. I was just honestly very drunk and probably, in more general sense, at the time of my life, very bored. The next day, my family flew out to Vegas, and they showed up, and they stared at me with eyes of fury. Okay, so the family shows up. They're livid, okay? They're really mad. She's like, I mean, this isn't the end of the world. I didn't, somebody. And they're like, this is worse. They didn't say that, but they insinuated it. So they forced the two to get an annulment, fill out the paperwork, and file it. She also says that them saying it was such a bad idea made her think that maybe it was actually a great idea. But she still got the annulment. And she ends the chapter by saying, quote, perhaps it's worth mentioning that by this point, I was supporting them financially. Chapter 18 is next. It is time to recap Chapter 18. So at this point, she hates touring, and her brother Brian is working for the tour. But this is where their relationship changes. She said she grew to resent him because although she was making a lot of money, she knew that she was paying him very well, and he was getting to go home and live his life. And she was just constantly working and working and working. Quote, I lost track of my brother in those years. And so in many ways, I felt as though I lost Justin and Brian around the same time. She injured her knee a few times in this tour. So when she would have an injury, she would have to like postpone a couple dates. And she didn't want to be doing the tour anyway, so she liked that. Then she meets Kevin Federline. She speaks very fondly of Kevin in this chapter, and she says that he made her feel like she could just like be herself. Specifically, she talks about how they would like go to the pool and he would hold her in the pool for as long as she wanted and not let go until she asked. Quote, that is what he was to me, steady, strong, a comfort. I remember we would go swimming. He'd wrap his arms around me in the water and not let me go until I wanted him to, no matter how long it took. She said Kevin made her feel safe and protected, and she wanted someone to take care of her, and he was giving that. But also, he wasn't being honest with her. Quote, Kevin had a bad boy image. Still, I had no idea when we met that he had a toddler, nor that his ex-girlfriend was 8 months pregnant with his second baby. I was clueless. When she asked him about it, he didn't lie. In the spring of 2004, she has to go back on tour because she's in a contract, so she brings him with. It says, quote, flying home, we were chatting away and I asked him to marry me. He said no, and then he proposed. Then they filmed their tour diaries together. It was a reality show called Britney and Kevin Chaotic. Then she hurts her knee again, and this time really bad, so she has to get surgery and then go on something for the pain. But she said the Onyx tour was a big mistake, and she didn't like it. And she even adds, quote, I realize now that I should have sat back and taken my time getting over the breakup with Justin before I resumed touring. She touches on that Jamie Lynn landed the Nickelodeon deal at this point and that she was really happy for her. Then she goes on to talk about how her relationship with Kevin had to be like constantly defended because people did not want them together, did not like seeing them together. And then they had a surprise wedding ceremony and People magazine covered it. So this is the cover of People when Britney got married. Then she talks about her Juicy Couture tracksuits that she gave out. She said she had a pink one that said Mrs. Federline. I couldn't find a photo of it. But don't worry, I have these. And a little cutting the cake moment. The bridesmaids with their dresses. And a Britney close-up. She said being with Kevin started to give her the confidence to just say no to things. So she ends up canceling the Onyx tour. And she said that made her feel like she's starting to get control over her life. Let's go to chapter 19. Okay, let's recap chapter 19. Chapter 19 is all about her being pregnant with the boys. She said she didn't really like pregnancy. She only liked two things, food and doing it, if you know what I mean. Other than that, she said she was the meanest woman alive when she was pregnant. Quote, I was protective over Jamie Lynn too. After she complained to me about a co-star of hers on her TV show, I showed up to the set to have a few words with the actress. I must have looked like hugely pregnant, yelling at a teenager, and I would later learn innocent girl. Are you spreading rumors about my sister? To the young actress. I'm sorry. Go ahead and name the actress in the comments. Thank you. For a second time, she mentions that her mother relentlessly told her how much childbirth hurt and how long it was when she had her. So she was very nervous about that and relieved when they said they could give her a C-section. Sean Preston was born September 14th, 2005. She said right away she knew he was like a sweet, kind boy. And then 3 months later, she was pregnant again. And the whole rest of the chapter is about how relentless and awful the paparazzi was to her while she had Sean Preston and was pregnant. One time almost making her fall to the ground. She said all they wanted to do was take pictures of her and then post them and say, oh, look how much weight she's gained. And look, she's not wearing any makeup. And that was a pretty short chapter, so now let's jump right into chapter 20. Welcome back. This is chapter 20. These chapters don't have names, but if I were to name this chapter, I would name it Kevin Federline Becomes a Rapper. So after Sean Preston is born, Kevin decides he's going to be working harder on some music. At this point, they have Sean Preston, and she's pregnant with Jaden. And Britney was super supportive of it, although she couldn't really hang out at the studio or anything because they were smoking a lot, and she didn't want to be around it. She said it would make her nauseous. So K-Fed's like always in the studio. He's never around. And she starts to spiral, like something's not right here. But she tries to like justify it in her head. He's my husband. I should respect him. He's the father of my children. I should have a deeper respect for him now than when we were dating. She just tries to overlook it all. She actually called it giving herself a pep talk. So at this time, he was recording in New York, so she flies out to New York to see him. Books herself a fancy hotel, all the things. but he won't see her. His manager is someone that's been on her team for years and is like, nah, sorry, he doesn't want to see you. And then she's confused. She's like, when you left, you hugged me, you kissed me. Like, what happened in between that? Why all of a sudden are you like not answering me and don't want to see me? She said she thought he was like feeling himself a little bit too much, especially because he started getting some press. Listen to this, okay? Quote, one time he came home late and told me he had been at a party. Justin Timberlake was there, he said. Lindsay Lohan too. She said in her head, she was like, do you think I care about this stupid party? But she didn't say it out loud. She just ate it. She said he was enthralled with fame and power. She said she's seen fame and money ruin people, but she watched it happen to him in slow motion. She talks about how some celebrities can handle fame and some can't, and she thinks that J-Lo is someone that handles fame really well. Britney says he then leaves that New York studio and he starts recording at a studio in Vegas. Quote, he really thought he was a rapper now. Bless his heart, because he did take it so seriously. So anyway, she shows up to Vegas. With Sean Preston, she's still pregnant. And she's sympathetic for him. She's like, he's trying to make a name for himself. I'm going to make some sacrifices. He's my husband. She said she already knew it's scary to put yourself out there. And so he was doing that. So she leaves Sean Preston with the nanny. And she goes up to the studio. And they won't let her in. Quote, security guards that worked at my home were at the door and wouldn't let me in. It felt like everyone on that set was shunning me. So she peeked through the window. She sees they're smoking. They're having a good time. They're partying. It's a bunch of young people. And then she just goes back to the hotel. And then she ends the chapter by saying when she was in the hotel, there was a knock at the door. And it was one of her brother's old friends. His name is Jason Trawick. Again, if I butchered his name, I'm so sorry. And he said, how are you doing? She said she suspected he found out or knew what had happened. And she said, when was the last time anyone ever asked me that? And now we're on to chapter 21. Welcome back. It's chapter 21. So, just a few days before Sean Preston has his first birthday, Jaden's born on September 12, 2005. She said he was a super happy kid right from birth. She said after she gave birth, she felt so light because she had been pregnant for 2 straight years and was excited that all her clothes fit again. She goes in to talk about the paparazzi and how they hounded her about her kids and that her and Kevin got better at hiding the children. She said after the birth of each one of the kids, they would look out the window and see how many paps are out there to see what they were going to have to deal with. She said she actually hadn't done much press during that year, but she did go on Dateline with Matt Lauer, and he told her everyone was asking if she was a bad mom. And talks a lot about how her home becomes her safe haven. She really loved her home. She designed it herself. She said it was right next to Mel Gibson's house and that she would regularly see Olivia Newton-John and that she would be like, hey, Olivia Newton-John. Anytime she saw her, she'd ask her how she was. She keeps talking about how during that time she was very mean, specifically to the contractors because she really wanted marble floors and they didn't want to do marble floors. They wanted to do wood, but she was insistent she do marble. She said she's more aware now that she probably had some sort of postpartum depression. She said this is when she kind of started to revert to different ages in her childhood. When her kids turned a certain age, she became that age too and would start acting more childish. Quote, I've heard that this sometimes happens to parents, especially if you have trauma from your childhood. When your kids get to be the age that you were when you're dealing with something rough, you relive it emotionally. Sorry, and actually she didn't call it postpartum depression. She called it perinatal depression. Quote, I hope any new mothers reading this who are having a hard time will get help early and will channel their feelings into something more healing than white marble floors. Are you ready for chapter 22? It's time for chapter 22. She said after Jaden was born, it was kind of a blur, but Fee was coming in and out of her life. At this point, she's working with a stylist to get back towards her original color because she had dyed her hair black when she was pregnant with Jaden. She said it took forever to get it right, like nearly everything else in her life. Her words. She said no matter what was going on, she felt the best when she was creating and making music. She had the most freedom when she was recording. She meets a guy named Nate Hills, and he gets her into more of an EDM vibe. Quote, he introduced me to new sounds, and I got to stretch my voice in different ways. She talks about the paparazzi just crazy hounding her and her kids. So her A&R rep, whose name was Teresa, she got her a baby swing to put in the studio. And Britney thought that was the nicest gesture. She said recording the Blackout album was a battle cry. Quote, Blackout was one of the easiest and most satisfying albums I ever made. It came together really fast. I would go into the studio, be in there for 30 minutes, and leave. That wasn't by design. It had to be fast. If I stayed in one place for too long, the paparazzi outside would multiply. She said Gimme More was like her favorite shoot. They did it all on their own. Quote, I quit doing business the way I always had before. I started doing videos on the street myself. I would go into bars with a friend, and the friend would just bring a camera, and that's how we shot Gimme More. To be clear, I'm not saying I'm proud of it. Gimme More is by far the worst video I've ever shot in my life. I don't like it at all. It's so tacky. Then the end of the chapter is just about how Kevin is just never around. Quote, meanwhile, Kevin was doing a lot of press, and you would have thought that he just hit a grand slam in the World Series. She said she didn't even know who he is anymore. Quote, then he was asked to do a Super Bowl commercial for Nationwide. It didn't matter that the ad was making fun of him playing a fast food worker who dreams of being a star. After he got that offer, I basically never saw him. It was like he was too good to even talk to me. He told everyone else that being a father was everything to him, the best thing in his life. You wouldn't know it, because the sad truth was he was away a lot. Chapter 23 is next. Chapter 23, let's just get right into it. Divorce chapter. Her lawyer ends up telling her, if you don't file for divorce, he's going to do it first. They said Kevin wants to file for divorce, but he feels guilty about it. Quote, he knew it would make him look better publicly if I was the one who filed. And since her lawyer told her that Kevin was going to file either way, she figured, let me save myself the embarrassment. Let me file first. So she said, early November 2006, when Jaden's like 2 months old, she files. Both her and Kevin both asked for full custody. What she didn't know was going to happen was Kevin was going to ask for all his legal bills to be paid for by her. Quote, and because legally I had set the divorce in motion, I would be held responsible in the press for having broken up a young family. Kevin's album dropped a week before the divorce, and she said that was probably good for his album. She said the press raked him through the coals. Britney says she goes to present at the American Music Awards. And what they didn't tell her was right before she was about to go on to announce a winner, Jimmy Kimmel was going to make a joke about Kevin. Quote, Jimmy Kimmel delivered a monologue and a skit about Kevin, who he called, quote, the world's first ever no-hit wonder. They sealed a stand-in into a crate and put it on a truck and dumped it into the ocean. So Britney actually thought that all this violent, aggressive talk about her ex was bad for everyone. Quote, everyone seemed to be delighted by the news of our divorce except for me. I did not feel like celebrating. Looking back, I think both Justin and Kevin were very clever. They knew what they were doing, and I played right into it. And she ends the chapter by saying, because of those two men, she never was able to trust anyone ever again. Are you ready for chapter 24? Chapter 24, and we're about halfway through. She starts out talking about her relationship with Paris Hilton. Quote, so much of America dismissed her as a party girl, but I found her elegant, the way she posed on red carpets and always had an arched eyebrow when anyone was mean about her. She said that Paris knew she was suffering during the breakup and that she had babies, so she would come over to her house all the time and help her out. She said other than that time that Jason Trawick knocked on the door and asked her how she was, this was the nicest anyone had ever been to her. She said her and Paris would go out and party, but it was never that serious and they only drank. She said she never took any of the hard stuff. She said the only thing that she ever took was ADHD meds for her depression. She said everybody made a really big deal about her, Paris, and Lindsay Lohan going out and drinking, but really all she was doing was drinking a little and having some fun. She said it was never that serious. So she said one night they were at the beach house and Lynn was watching the kids while she went out with Paris. And when she gets home, Lynn's like, you're drunk. And she's like, yeah, I know. And then Lynn screams at her similar to the way she used to scream at Jamie and gets really, really mad at her. Quote, and on that night, I'd had her babysit so I could go out responsibly without kids seeing their mother under the influence. The shame I felt killed my heart. I stood there reeling and thought, okay, I guess it's forbidden for me to party. My mom always made me feel like I was bad or guilty of something, even though I had worked so hard to be good. Let's go to chapter 25. Would you like to know what chapter 25 is about? Okay, let's do it. So Britney says her children are her whole life at this point. She's stripped of everything else, stripped of all her freedoms. She's upset because Justin Timberlake and Kevin Federline can go do it with whoever they want. They can smoke whenever they want. They can do whatever they want. No consequences. But she can't even go out to the bar without Lynn screaming at her. Quote, my family made me feel paralyzed. Britney goes on to talk about, in a bid to get custody of the children, Kevin Federline tries to paint her in a negative light. He tries to convince everyone that she's out of control. And he started to say that she shouldn't have the kids anymore. Quote, When he said that, I remember thinking in my head, surely this is a joke. This is just for the tabloids. Britney said she had this idea that everything she read in the tabloids about people divorcing and about custody of their kids was like put in there to help the custody battle, but none of it was really true. So she figured he was just doing the same thing. Quote, so I kept waiting for him to bring the boys back to me after he took them. He not only wouldn't bring them back to me, he wouldn't let me see them for weeks on end. And in January 2007, her aunt Sandra passes away from cancer. And she's very upset. And at this time, she gets a call from a popular director who wants her to do a dark film, but she thinks she's in a really bad headspace for that, so she turns it down. By February, she hasn't seen the boys in weeks and weeks. So she goes to Kevin's to plead and beg. Quote, Jaden James was 5 months old and Sean Preston was 17 months old. I imagine they're not knowing where their mother was, wondering why she didn't want to be with them. I wanted to get a battering ram to get them. I didn't know what to do. And the paparazzi watched it all happen. She felt cornered and she felt like she was being chased by them. She said it was absolutely humiliating. So that night, after they watched her beg Kevin Federline outside his house, she decided she was going to give them a little bit of material. So she went into the hair salon, she took the clippers, and she shaved her head. Quote, my long hair was a big part of what people liked. I knew that. I knew a lot of guys thought long hair was hot. Shaving my head was a way of saying to the world, you. Britney says at the end of the day, she didn't care about anything. She just wanted to see her kids. Let's go to chapter 26. This is chapter 26, and we are going to learn about the umbrella incident. At this point, Britney is freaking out about not seeing her kids, and her cousin Allie comes into town. Because of the divorce, she had to move out of the house, and now she's living in a cottage, but all the paparazzi have access to her now, and they're just circling like sharks. So Allie goes to drive her to Kevin's to try to see the kids. She didn't think there'd be paparazzi, but somebody tipped them off. So Britney and Allie stop at a gas station, and 2 paparazzi approach them, and they're peppering her with questions. So they drove to Kevin's, and they're still getting followed by these 2 guys. And she gets denied entry when trying to go to Kevin's house. Turned away, trying to see her own children. So her and Allie pull over and try to figure out what to do. And the paparazzi start hammering them with questions again. So this time, she gets out. She gets the green umbrella. And she's like, I wasn't going to hit him, but I hit his car. She starts hitting the car. Before this, Allie tried to beg for them to leave, but they wouldn't leave. She said she was so embarrassed about it that she wrote a letter to the photography agency to apologize. Quote, I was so embarrassed by what I'd done that I sent the photo agency an apology note mentioning that I'd been in a running for a dark film role, which was true, and that I wasn't quite myself, which also true. Later, the paparazzo would say in an interview for a documentary about me, quote, that was not a good night for her, but it was a good night for us, because we got the money shot. In this chapter, we actually hear our first little bit about Sam. So she ends the chapter by saying, now my husband Hassam tells me that it's a whole thing for beautiful girls to shave their head. It's a vibe, he says, a choice not to play into ideas of conventional beauty. He tries to make me feel better about it because he feels bad about how much it still pains me. Let's read chapter 27 next. Are you sick of hearing from me yet? This is chapter 27. After Britney shaves her head, Lynn won't even look at her. And they tell Britney that the only way that she might get to see her kids is if she goes to rehab. And she said she didn't have a problem and didn't need to go to rehab. She was just dealing with grief, but she goes anyway because she wants to see her kids. Quote, when I arrived, my father was there. He sat across from me. There were 3 picnic tables between us. He said, you are a disgrace. Britney says looking back, she should have called Big Rob, but she was ashamed and embarrassed. But when she got out, she got 50-50 custody of the kids. But the battle with Kevin, she said, was eating her alive. So Blackout comes out Halloween 2007. And to promote it, she's got to perform at the VMAs. And she said she goes to perform at the VMAs and everything's going wrong. Like she hasn't slept, she's dizzy, she didn't practice enough, she doesn't like the way she looks, like all the things. And then she runs into Justin backstage. And Britney thinks everything's just going perfect for him, and that makes her feel bad. So she goes out and she performs, but she feels like the performance did not go well. This is an image from the performance. I watched the performance, it just seemed low energy. But Britney was comparing her performance to Justin Timberlake's performance at the same show. He was on stage with Nelly Furtado, and she just thought he was on top of the world, and he just did such a better job than her. She really beat herself up about that and went in the back and was crying and sobbing her eyes out while Sarah Silverman was on stage roasting her. Quote, later that night, the comedian Sarah Silverman came out on stage to roast me. She said that at the age of 25, I'd done everything worthwhile in my life I'd ever do. She called my 2 babies, quote, the most adorable mistake she'll ever see. I didn't hear that until later, though. At the time, I was backstage sobbing hysterically. She said shortly after that, Dr. Phil called her a train wreck. Britney said the only press she did for the Blackout album was with Ryan Seacrest live on the radio. Quote, Ryan Seacrest asked me questions like, quote, how do you respond to those who criticize you as a mom? And do you feel like you're doing everything you can for your kids? And how often will you see them? I felt like that was the only thing people wanted to talk about, whether or not I was a fit mother. She goes on to say at the end of the chapter that her management quit and her bodyguard, being supported by Gloria Allred, went to court for the custody battle and said she was using. And she made a note to say he wasn't cross-examined. The chapter ends with her saying, quote, a court-appointed parenting coach said that I loved my children and that we were clearly bonded. She also said that there was nothing at all in my home that could be called abuse, but that part didn't make it in the headlines. Come back for chapter 28. This is chapter 28, and the SWAT team's involved. So this is a short chapter, but basically she says, a security guard comes to pick up the children. He's doing a custody transfer. So she loads the kids into the car, and the security guard, hypothetically, would then take them to Kevin. So she puts Sean Preston in first. And after she loads him into the car, she thinks, oh my goodness, I'm never going to see these kids again. So she darts in the house to where Jaden is. And she locks herself in the bathroom because she's like, I didn't even think about this. If I send my kids with him, I might never see them again. So a friend comes into the bathroom and is like, don't worry, the security guard will wait, spend some time with Jaden, and everything will be okay. Except the friend is a liar. Quote, before I knew what was happening, a SWAT team in black suits burst through the bathroom door as if I had hurt someone. The only thing I was guilty of was feeling desperate to keep my own children for a few more hours and to get some assurance that I wasn't going to lose them for good. I looked at my friend and just said, but you said he would wait. I don't think I need to tell you that this was a media circus. So they tied her up on a gurney and they took her to the hospital on a hold. It was a 72-hour hold, but they let her out early. And now she felt like she was all alone, nobody was on her side, and even her family was against her. Britney said no one had her back. Quote, right around the holidays, I found out about my 16-year-old sister's pregnancy from an exclusive in the tabloids. The family had kept it from me. This was around the time that Jamie Lynn almost filed for emancipation from our parents. Among the things she accused them of was taking away her cell phone. She wound up having to talk to the outside world through burner phones she kept a secret. In regards to her family, she ends the chapter by saying, quote, I began to suspect that they were secretly celebrating that I was having the worst time in my life. But surely that couldn't be the case, right? Surely I was paranoid, right? All right, fine, let's do chapter 29. This is chapter 29. This is one of the longest chapters so far and probably the most interesting. She said in January 2008, she was hospitalized, and that's how the chapter starts. She says she probably shouldn't admit it, but she was hell on wheels and that she was taking a lot of ADHD med. And she starts dating a photographer who was paparazzo. She doesn't mention him by name, but his name was Adnan. Her family was not a fan, and he encourages her to rebel. Quote, back then I would speak up if I didn't like something. I would certainly let you know, and I wouldn't think twice about it. Parentheses. If I had been hit in the face in Vegas, as happened to me in July 2023, I would have hit the person back 100%. So that guy encouraged her to party and act reckless. And then, turns out, he was married. She didn't know. She actually only found out he was married after they broke up. She said he actually helped her through her depression because she just wanted attention and he would give her the attention. So the two of them escaped to Mexico to get away from all the craziness. But while she's there, Lynn calls her and is like, you gotta come back to the beach house because the cops are looking for you and we need to talk. So she says they get there and everything's a little off. And even the photographer is like, something's off here, right? And she's like, definitely something's off here. Here's how the discussion went down. Quote, my mother was acting suspicious. When the photographer got there, he said, something's up, right? Yeah, I said, something's really off. And all of a sudden, there were helicopters going around the house. Is that for me? I asked my mom. Is this a joke? It wasn't a joke. Suddenly, there was a SWAT team of what seemed like 20 cops in my house. What the? did I do?" I kept shouting. "I didn't do anything." So she knew she had been acting wild, but she didn't do anything illegal. She said they were treating her like a bank robber. Quote, "I later come to believe something had changed that month, since the last time I was brought to the hospital for evaluation." She said Jamie had struck up a friendship with Lou Taylor, and they were implementing the conservatorship. She goes on to explain what a conservatorship is and how it works, but here's what you really want to know about. Quote, "I was making a lot of people a lot of money, especially my father, who I found out took a bigger salary than he paid me. He paid himself more than $6 million while paying others close to him tens of millions more." She said Jamie actually set up 2 conservatorships. One was a conservatorship of person, and one was a conservatorship of estate. Quote, "My father was given the job, the same man who made me cry if I had to get in the car with him when I was a little girl because he talked to himself." So she said the role was taken over by her father and a lawyer. The lawyer's name was Andrew Wallet. Quote, "Andrew Wallet, who would eventually be paid $426,000 a year for keeping me from my own money. I would be forced to pay upward of $500,000 a year to my court-appointed lawyer, who I wasn't allowed to replace. It felt like my father and Lou's employee Robin Greenhill ruled my life and monitored every move I made. I'm a 5'4" pop singer who calls everyone sir and ma'am. They treated me like I was a criminal or predator. There were times when I needed my father over the years and I reached out and he wasn't there. But when it came time for him to be the conservator, of course, he was on the case. He's always been about the money." She says she can't say her mom's any better. She said she acted all innocent, but the whole time she knew what was going on. Britney says she thinks it was all planned out by her mom, Lou Taylor, her dad, and TriStar. She later learns that her dad actually owed Lou Taylor $40,000, which was a lot of money for Jamie. Soon after that, she's brought to the hospital against her will and informed that the conservatorship was filed. Let's go to chapter 30. Your girl is back. She's fed, she's rested, and she's ready for chapter 30. And we're also going to do chapter 31. I'm combining them. Chapter 30 is an entire chapter, a very short chapter, about Lynn Spears and the memoir she wrote. Britney describes it as Lynn capitalizing and making money off her children's pain. Quote, "She wrote it trading on my name and talking about her parenting of me and my brother and sister at the time when all 3 of us kids were basket cases." Britney said she had to watch her do her press tour for her book and then watch videos and pictures of her shaving her head over and over again every time she saw it. Quote, "My mother was telling Meredith Vieira on the Today Show that she had spent hours wondering how things went so wrong with me. Quote, she was on the morning talk shows trying to sell her book about when I was in hospitals and being driven insane because I was separated from my babies for weeks on end. She was making money off that dark time." Britney says this is just something she wouldn't do to her children. So this is the last I'll say about it. Quote, "The last thing I would do would be to cut my hair into a bob and put on a tasteful pantsuit and sit down on a morning show set across from Meredith Vieira and make money off my child's misfortunes." 31 is just as short. That's why we're combining. And it's about how she just can't believe that the state of California put Jamie in charge of her. Quote, "The conservatorship was created supposedly because I was incapable of doing anything at all, feeding myself, spending my own money, being a mother, anything. So why was it that a few weeks later they had me shoot an episode of How I Met Your Mother and then sent me on a grueling world tour?" She said from this point forward, she thought that Jamie thought that she was put on earth to make him money. So she said up till this point, she was keeping all her receipts in a bowl for tax purposes so she could monitor for tax deductions. Quote, "To me, that bowl of receipts was proof that I was still capable of managing my affairs." Quote, "My father shoved aside my bowl of receipts, setting up his things on the bar. Quote, I just want to let you know," he said, "I call the shots. You sit right there in that chair and I'll tell you what goes on." Put on your seatbelt because I don't know that you're ready for this last line. This is how the chapter ends. Quote, "I looked at him with a growing sense of horror. 'I'm Britney Spears now,' he said." Come back for chapter 32. Welcome back. This is chapter 32. Britney said on the rare occasion that she went out, like if she went to Kate Hudson's house, the security team would have to come in and sweep the home for alcohol, the other stuff, and even Tylenol. None of the people at the party were allowed to drink until she went home. Quote, "When someone wanted to date me, the security team who answered to my father would run a background check on him, make him sign an NDA, and even have him submit a blood test. Before a date, Robin would tell the man my medical and history. To be clear, this was before the first date. The whole thing was humiliating. Britney goes on to say she didn't know she could find her own lawyer. She thought she had to use the court-appointed lawyer. She also adds, quote, my mother, who is best friends with the governor of Louisiana, could have put me on the phone with him and he would have told me I could get my own lawyer, but she kept it a secret. Instead, she got a lawyer for herself, just so she could get off on fighting with my dad like she did when I was younger. She said when her cell phone would get taken away, she would try to smuggle a cell phone, but she'd always get caught. So there were times she was trying to break free. Britney said that sadly, it just got to the point where she didn't have a lot of fight left in her. She said after she married Kevin, Felicia kind of stopped coming around. Quote, I later learned that my dad told her I didn't want her to work for me anymore, but I never said that. If I had known she wanted to do something for me, I never would have told her no. Without my knowledge, my father was keeping her from me. So then she just starts doing what she's told. Quote, under Robin's direction, security guards handed me pre-packaged envelopes of meds and watched me take them. They put parental controls on my iPhone. Everything was scrutinized and controlled. Everything. She said it was like Groundhog's Day for 13 years. Quote, because I played by the rules, I was reunited with my boys. Then she drags Kevin a little bit. She says, quote, to see them as much as possible, I did everything I could to appease Kevin. I paid his legal bills, plus child support, plus thousands more a month so the kids could come along with me on the circus tour. She said she continued to be confused. Why am I allowed to do this tour, the tree lighting in New York City, all these things, and I can't control any of my life? She said the circus tour grossed $130 million, and Lou Taylor's TriStar got 5% of it. And when they were on hiatus, Jamie was paying TriStar a flat fee, so they were paid an additional hundreds of thousands of dollars more. Quote, my father got a percentage too, plus throughout the conservatorship about $16,000 a month, more than he'd ever made before. He profited heavily from the conservatorship, becoming a multi-millionaire. My freedom in exchange for naps with my children, it was a trade I was willing to make. There's nothing I love more, nothing more important to me on this earth than my children. I'd lay down my life for them. So I thought, why not my freedom? I will not cry on camera. Come back for chapter 33. Let's talk chapter 33. In chapter 33, we get a little bit of a glimpse of co-parenting with Kevin Federline. Quote, at the time, Kevin would say, if you meet me this weekend, we'll have a 2-hour meeting and we'll do this and we'll do that. And I might let you see the boys a little more. Everything was almost like a deal with the devil for me to get what I wanted. She goes on to write about how the things that got her put in a conservatorship, she feels like there are some men who have done worse things and they're not in a conservatorship. And then Britney starts to go into how her dad just continuously calls her fat. Britney says she stopped putting her heart into it when she was working and she just became a robot. Eat, sleep, perform. Quote, the conservatorship stripped me of my womanhood and made me into a child. I had always felt music in my bones and my blood. They stole that from me. Think of how many male artists gambled all their money away, how many substance abuse or mental issues. No one tried to take away the control of their body and money. I didn't deserve what my family did to me. Britney goes on to say that she was more than capable of taking care of herself. In 2008, she won more than 20 awards, and she was Cosmopolitan's Ultimate Woman of the Year. She won 3 Moon Men, forgive me more. Piece of Me got Video of the Year. Quote, I sometimes thought that it was almost funny how I won those awards for the album I made while I was supposedly so incapacitated that I had to be controlled by my family. Let's go right into chapter 34. Chapter 34, let's learn about Jason Trawick. So this is Jason. If you may remember from an earlier chapter, Jason's the guy who knocked on the hotel door to ask her how she was. Friends with Brian, her brother. He was an agent, so he understood the business, and they dated for 3 years. In this chapter, we're going to bounce back and forth talking about him. Jamie and Lynn, at this point, get back together. Quote, my mom seemed to love that because of the conservatorship, my dad now had a real job. She also talks about being a judge on the X Factor. She said a lot of people can handle being professional on TV, like Christina Aguilera and Gwen Stefani, but she said she just couldn't do it. It just made her way too nervous. Quote, now, if you got me a cute cameo on a fun TV show where I'm in and out in a day, that's one thing. But to act skeptical for 8 hours straight while judging people on TV, no thank you. I absolutely hated it. Around this time, her and Jason get engaged. Not long after that, he becomes co-conservator. And she said having him tied up in the conservatorship like that was like a turnoff. And she completely stopped loving him, and she stopped staying in the same room as him. Quote, my mom said, that is hateful. I'm sorry, I can't help it. I just don't love him anymore like that. He broke up with me, but I didn't care because I'd fallen out of love with him. He wrote me a long letter and then disappeared. He resigned as my co-conservator. If you're wondering if we were going to talk about Christina Aguilera, we are. So under the conservatorship, when she was touring, no one was allowed to drink. It was very strict. Quote, once I ended up with most of the same dancers as Christina Aguilera. The dancers and I met up with Christina in Los Angeles. She seemed pretty messed up. But the dancers and I wound up swimming in a beautiful pool and sitting in a jacuzzi. She said that her life became a Sunday school Bible church. We end this chapter with her manager saying, hey, do you want to do a Vegas residency? And she's like, why not? She said she went to Vegas like everybody else, hoping to win. Let's go to chapter 35. This is chapter 35. So in this chapter, we're starting the Vegas residency. We are living in Vegas. She said actually this residency gave her so much confidence because the fans just like really loved it and she loved doing it. At this time, she starts dating Charlie. Charlie Ebersol, I am unsure. Don't badger me about it, okay? But that is his name. Quote, to me, he seemed like marriage material. He took great care of himself. His family was close. I loved him. So Charlie was really into like fitness and working out, and he got Britney into like taking vitamins and supplements. And one of these supplements was an energy supplement. Quote, my father didn't like that. He knew what I ate, even knew when I would go to the bathroom. So when I started taking energy supplements, he saw that I had more energy on stage and that I was in better shape than I had been. So Jamie says she needs to get off of them and sends her to rehab. So she has to go to rehab for the energy supplements, and then she's gone and doesn't get to see her kids for a full month. It was in Malibu, and she said she was actually pretty scared because everyone there had very serious addictions, and she did not. So Jamie watches her every move at this point. She can't even drive a car. They had a chef, and she starts begging the chef for like burgers and stuff because she's not allowed to eat certain things, but they won't do it for her. Quote, so for 2 years, I ate almost nothing but chicken and canned vegetables. And he keeps calling her fat. Quote, no one else but me seemed to find it outrageous that my father would set all these rules for me and then go out and drink Jack and Cokes. She buys them a beach house in Destin. So Britney says that Jamie Lynn used to make comments like, I don't know why you bought this beach house. But then she would talk to Lynn, and Lynn was bringing Jamie Lynn's kids to the Destin beach. Quote, I used to love buying my family houses and cars, but there came to a point when they started to take it for granted, and the family didn't realize that those things were possible because I am an artist, and because of how they treated me for years, I lost touch with my creativity. She had a $2,000 allowance per week, but anything she wanted to buy had to get approved by them. So if she wanted sneakers and the conservators didn't think that she was needed the sneakers, they just wouldn't let her buy them. Quote, this was despite the fact that I did 248 shows and sold more than 900,000 tickets in Vegas. Each show paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. But she wasn't allowed to buy sneakers. She ends this chapter with the saddest story ever, which she takes a bunch of people from the show out to dinner because she just wanted to thank them for all their hard work. And then she wanted to obviously buy their dinner, and she went and swiped her card, and it was declined because the bill was $1,000 and she didn't have enough money in her allowance account to pay it. Come back for chapter 36. Are you ready to hear about chapter 36? Okay, let's do it. So Britney starts out the chapter by telling us that when she was in Vegas doing the residency, that she actually taught little kids dance classes and loved it. She actually said it's one of the most fun things she's ever done in her life. Quote, I find it 100% healing to be around children. Then she goes into how she tried to make a push to get rid of the conservatorship in 2014. Quote, I went to court in 2014 and mentioned my father's alcoholism and erratic behavior, asking them to test him. You know, the kind of test you pee in a cup. After all, he was controlling my money and my life, but my case didn't go anywhere and the judge didn't listen. She also says she mentioned the conservatorship in 2016 on a talk show, but that part of the interview didn't make it on air. And she says, quote, how interesting. Then Britney says the feeling of being trapped led to the breakdown of her relationship with Charlie. She said they had a very stupid fight, but then neither of them would talk to each other because they were very prideful. After the breakup with Charlie, she starts songwriting again. Quote, that's when I started working with two great songwriters, Julia Michaels and Justin Tranter. When she was done, she played it for the boys and she asked them, what should I name the album? And Sean Preston said Glory. So that's what she named it. She said seeing the boys be so proud of the album made her feel so proud. Then we meet Sam. Quote, the first time I saw Hassam Asghari on the set of my video for Slumber Party, I knew I wanted him in my life immediately. I was instantly smitten. The chemistry with us in the beginning was insane. We couldn't keep our hands off each other. He called me his lioness. 2 weeks into dating, the tabloids are saying he's cheating on her. If you've never heard about this before, she did not mention this in the book. This is just me adding for context. This is a girl named Morgan Osman, and she allegedly posted this on her Instagram and Daily Mail picked it up. This is what she's referring to. So after Britney tells us about Sam, she jumps right into that she snuck one of her energy supplements, and then Jamie makes her go back to rehab. Except he tells her you could do outpatient, and so what they end up doing is sending her to Alcoholics Anonymous. She actually says that the women there were amazing and their stories were amazing and they inspired her, so she didn't hate going. But there were times that she didn't want to go to every single meeting. Like this one time she wanted to just watch a movie on the couch with her boys and eat popcorn, and they were like, no, you have to go. She had an insane schedule of practicing, performing, AA meetings, all the things. She ends the chapter by saying she had a hairdresser who got a glimpse of the schedule and was like, that is too much. You need less on that schedule because you can't be creative if you don't have any downtime. You need downtime to play, to be creative. That's how creativity works. And then the next time she mentioned this to Jamie. She was like, everyone thinks this schedule is too rough on me. And the next time she went to get her hair done, the lady was gone. Jamie got rid of her. 37 is next. Let's go. Chapter 37. Britney talks about how her hair played a big part in her performances. And in Vegas, she wore these really tight wigs so that she can whip her hair around. Quote, everyone who was making money off me wanted me to move my hair and I knew it. And so I did everything but that. She says this is where she starts to rebel, where she starts to get her confidence back, where she starts to feel strong. She says as the singles for Glory started to roll out, she just starts to get her confidence. Quote, promoting Glory, I began to feel better about myself. It was her third year in Vegas, and she was starting to finally feel alive in front of an audience again. She said at this point, her and Sam are talking about how they want to have a baby together and start a family. So she wants to make an appointment to get her IUD removed. She says at this point she's seeing 12 doctors because of the conservatorship a week. Quote, and yet my father wouldn't let me go to the doctor when I asked for an appointment to get my IUD removed. So he wouldn't let her take it out. She also describes the level at which she's being monitored. Quote, during the conservatorship, a team of people kept track of when I was going to use the toilet in the recording studio. I'm not even kidding. And since this is a short chapter, I'll read you the whole next part about her being monitored. Quote, I read after the conservatorship that my father and Robin at Lou Taylor's company TriStar had been involved with the security company they hired, Black Box, in monitoring and reviewing calls and texts coming out of and going to my cell phone, including private texts with my boyfriend, my lawyer at the time, and my own kids. And worse, that my father even had a bug put in my home. In my own home. This was all part of their control. Come back for chapter 38. This is going to be chapter 38, 39, and 40 because they're all really short. She continues to talk about how they're on the third year of the Vegas residency and she feels stronger than she has in many, many years. She mentions looking up to Reese Witherspoon, saying that Reese is sweet and nice and smart. Quote, when I started to think I could be like Reese, someone who is nice but also strong, it changed my perspective on who I was. At this point, the residency is set to end in December 31st, 2017 to be exact, and she's very excited about it. Mostly because she feels like she can't give her fans the best performance because she's not allowed to modify anything. She wants to do remixes of the songs and they won't let her. They won't let her try anything new. Here we get a little insight into this little Jamie Lynn performance where Britney looks annoyed. She was receiving the first ever Radio Disney Icon Award. She said a medley of her songs were performed and then Jamie Lynn performed this song, Till the World Ends. She says, quote, while I was honored by the performances, I was furious. Here were 3 singers and my sister doing arrangements, something I had begged for 13 years, having fun with my songs in a way I hadn't in hundreds of performances, and I was sitting there having to smile. Now, chapter 39. So Britney says every year she's allowed to go on 2 vacations with her kids a year. They usually go to Maui. But the year that Glory came out, they made her tour instead, so she couldn't go, and she had to bring the kids on tour. So when that was over, she wanted to go on the vacations. She said this tradition was important to her. So she talks to the team. They say she's going to get a whole summer off to be with the kids. Quote, as I was in my dressing room changing in between acts, someone from my team said, hey, yeah, so you're going on tour this year after Vegas ends. We can't just end in Vegas. We have to end it on tour this summer. That wasn't the deal, I said. I told you I'm taking my kids to Maui. But they told her, go on tour or end up in court, because they knew she was scared of court. So she went on tour. She also touches on that they wouldn't let her take any control over the show. Quote, because if I actually took control of my show, it would have awakened people to the fact that I might not need my dad as a conservator. So after the tour, they gave her 3 weeks off instead of the whole summer. And then it was back to rehearsing for Vegas. Now this is chapter 40. Now some of you might remember this, but in October of 2018, she was set to announce her residency at Park MGM. But she didn't announce it. Mario Lopez gets up, like to welcome the Queen of Vegas. She rises up from a hydraulic lift. Mario Lopez gives a ladies and gentlemen, Britney Spears. And here's how it played out. Quote, I walked down the stairs in my high heels to work, B, and I signed a few autographs for fans, but I did something unexpected. I walked past the cameras. I kept walking until I got into the SUV and I left. I said nothing. I did not perform. If you were watching, you were probably wondering, what just happened? What you didn't see was that my father and his team were trying to force me to announce the show. I'd said I didn't want to announce it because I'd been saying for months I didn't want to do it. Come back for chapter 41. We've made it to chapter 41. And Britney says that Jamie's plotting something. So she starts making holiday plans only to find out that the kids are going to spend Christmas with Jamie. Quote, when I pushed back, my father said, the boys don't want to be with you this year. They're coming home to Louisiana with me and your mom, and that's that. At this point, the Vegas show has not been canceled yet. So they are rehearsing, and she challenges a choreography move. She's like, I don't want to do that. That's too hard. My body can't do that anymore. She said immediately after she said it, a bunch of people went into a room and had a meeting about her, and she just knew immediately, like, something's up here. I must have done something horribly wrong. Quote, nothing was going wrong, but the way my team had behaved made me worried something was up. A day later, in therapy, my doctor confronted me. Quote, we found energy supplements in your purse, he said. The energy supplements gave me a sense of confidence and energy, and you didn't need a prescription for them. He knew that I had been taking them during my shows in Vegas, but now he made a big deal out of it. Quote, we feel like you're doing way worse things behind our back, he said, and we don't feel like you're doing well in rehearsals. You're giving everyone a hard time. Is this a joke, I said? So they tell her they're sending her to another facility. But they said, before you go, we're going to have a woman come here and evaluate you mentally. Quote, a flashy doctor who I'd seen on TV and instinctively hated came to my house against my will, sat me down, and tested my cognitive ability for hours. My father told me that the doctor had concluded that I bombed the test. She said, you failed. Now you have to go to the mental health facility. There's something severely wrong with you. And she says she was then sent to a rehab that cost $60,000 a month in Beverly Hills. Extra bonus points for the person who knows who the flashy female doctor from TV is. Put it in the comments. She asked, what happens if I don't go? And they said, then you got to go to court. And she ends the chapter by saying, quote, they kept me locked up against my will for months. Let us go to chapter 42. This is going to be chapter 42 and 43 because both of these chapters sum up her entirety in that facility. So the first portion of the time she was in that facility, she was alone, almost like a solitary type situation. And then the second half, they mixed her in with people. She did mandatory therapy for several hours every day. This is where she gets put on lithium. She says it messes with her concept of time and it slows everything down for her. She said one of the only people who called her was Kate Hudson. Quote, I did everything I was supposed to do. My kids would come for an hour on the weekends, but if I didn't do what I was supposed to do during the week, I wouldn't be allowed to see them. So she said they would continuously come in and take her blood pressure, take blood and all that. And they would bring in a whole team of people. So it'd be doctors, nurses, and security guards, which made her feel like a criminal. She said she gained a lot of weight because she couldn't move like she used to. She couldn't dance around. So all her clothes stopped fitting. She calls it feeling estranged from her body. So after 2 months of that, they mingle her with other people. But she said she would get scared because some of the other people would hear voices and that would scare her. She said she smoked her first Capri cigarette there. She says without God, she doesn't think she would have survived that place. Chapter 43. Quote, after a couple months, I called my father to beg him to let me go home. He said, I'm sorry, the judge is going to have to figure it out. He said, I can't help you at all. I'm giving you to the doctors. I can't help you. But then sent her a pearl necklace for Christmas. Quote, a lawyer would later say, your dad could have totally put a stop to that. He could have told the doctors, no, this is too much. Let's let my daughter go home. But he didn't. I called my mom to ask her why everyone was acting like I was so dangerous. Well, I don't know. Well, I don't know. I don't know, she would say. I also texted my sister. Stop fighting it, she texts back. There's nothing you can do about it. Stop fighting it. So she thought that Jamie Lynn should defend her, should be on her side. She wasn't. And this is how she finds out about the Free Britney movement, because a nurse in the facility brings her over to the computer and shows her people wearing the shirts and like all about the Free Britney movement. And she's super grateful about it. Quote, if you stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Chapter 44 is next. Welcome to chapter 44 and 45. So she finally gets to go home, and there's like a welcome part of her family coming to her house. Quote, we're so proud of you, Britney, my dad said. You did it. Now we all want to come and stay with you. But by this point, I could fully see through the BS. I knew what he was really saying was, I can't wait to see your money. I mean, you. She says her mother, her father, Jamie Lynn, and Jamie Lynn's daughters come to see her, but she calls them my sister's daughters, not her nieces. She said they all walk in like nothing ever happened. Quote, oh, hey, girl, what you doing? Jamie Lynn said, sounding chipper. Then Jamie Lynn says, you know what? I have a great idea for me and you. We should have a sister talk show. Girl. Then she jumps right into the time that Sean Preston and her dad have a fight in the house, and her dad breaks the door down and shakes Sean Preston. And then Kevin files a police report, and then her father couldn't see the boys anymore. She says at this point, she's just trying to manifest an end to it. To the conservatorship, to be clear. Chapter 45. She starts trying to be herself again, right? She's trying to be creative. She's like making all these videos. She's like posting on Insta. So she starts playing around with this song, and she was going to put this like evil baby laugh in the beginning of it. But Sam is like, don't put the baby laughing in it. So she takes it out. Then all of a sudden another account she follows posts something similar with a baby laughing in it, and then she's like kicking herself. She's like, why did I listen to him? I should have just put the baby laughing in there. She also says, quote, I also found myself laughing more, transported by comedians like Amy Schumer, Kevin Hart, Sebastian Maniscalco, and Joe Coy. Britney goes on to brag about her kids, saying Sean Preston is a genius in school, and that Jaden's so incredible on the piano that it gives her the chills. COVID hits in this chapter, and she's super isolated all by herself. She says she makes jewelry, listens to a ton of self-help audiobooks in a British accent. She said during the lockdown, Sam's work schedule and the quarantine stuff made it so that they could not see each other at all. So she was all alone. She points out that the lockdown rules in Louisiana were super loose in comparison to California. So like her family was just like living life, shopping, doing their thing because they didn't have to stay in their house. So for some strange reason, she decides to fly out to Louisiana to see her family. She said she doesn't even know why. She says it's a dysfunctional relationship and you can't make sense of it. She goes there and she finds out that they've thrown out all her like belongings from her childhood while she was in the facility. So she had like these big binders filled with poetry. She said she wasn't going to publish them or anything, but they meant a lot to her, and they scrapped them for garbage. This is how the chapter ends. Quote, in that moment, I made peace with my family, by which I mean that I realized I never wanted to see them again, and I was at peace with that. See you at chapter 46. This is another chapter combined. This is chapter 46 and chapter 47. I'm going to start this out straight reading. Quote, so on the night of June 22nd, 2021, from my home in California, I called 911 to report my father for conservatorship abuse. The time between when I started pushing hard to end the conservatorship and when it finally ended was a rough period in limbo. I didn't know how things would turn out. Meanwhile, I couldn't say no to my dad or make my own way yet, and it felt like every day there was another documentary about me on yet another streaming service. This was what was going on when I learned my sister would be coming out with a book. She says about the documentary that the intention was good, but she was upset because there were people that showed up in that documentary that were her friends that didn't even give her a heads up. Britney said if that was her, she would have asked her friend permission to do that. Chapter 47. So chapter 47 is about June 23rd, 2021, when she gets on that recording with the judge and she gets to tell the judge for the first time about what's going on. I said to the judge, I've lied and told the whole world I'm okay and I'm happy. It's a lie. I thought that maybe if I just said that enough, maybe I might become happy because I've been in denial. But now I'm telling you the truth, okay? I'm not happy. I can't sleep. I'm so angry it's insane and I'm depressed. I cry every day. I said I wish I could stay with you on the phone forever because when I get off the phone with you, all of a sudden, all I hear are these no's. The judge thanked her for speaking up and that made her feel like way better. She said it was a giant sense of relief. Come back for chapter 48. This is chapter 48. In this chapter, Kate Hudson helps her find her new lawyer, who is Matthew Rosengart. And she praises him up and down because he ended this conservatorship. So the first thing Matthew Rosengart does is he petitions to get Jamie removed from the conservatorship. So he files on July 26th, and by September 29th, they have a hearing and Jamie's out. She said it actually hit the news before Matthew could even call her from getting out of court. And then the second thing Matthew did was petition to get it removed completely. And she says she was at a resort in Tahiti in November when she got a phone call from him that was like, "You're free, baby." And then she goes on to detail just the emotions involved in realizing that she's free now. And she details that she's working on rebuilding her life. So at some point, Elton John's team had reached out to her to record that song. And I think she initially said no, because she writes here, quote, "I changed my mind about when I got invited to record a song with an artist I'd admired my entire life, Sir Elton John. He's one of my all-time favorite performers. I'd met him at an Oscar party about a decade ago, and we got along so well." So she decides to do it. She said he reached out with a very sweet video message. That's how it all came together. She said that she went to a producer's house in Beverly Hills and went into the man's basement, which was like a full studio, and she recorded it there. It's unclear if Elton John was there. It sounds like he was not, and they recorded separately, but I am unsure. Really, it doesn't touch on it. And then the song debuted August 26, 2022. Then Britney spends about a page and a half writing about how she just has compassion for and will always love her sister Jamie Lynn. Quote, "She will always be my sister, and I love her and her beautiful family. I wish the absolute best for them. She's been through a lot, including teen pregnancy, divorce, and her daughter's near-fatal accident." Britney also discusses that since being in that mental health facility, she gets really bad crippling migraines. Next, we'll discuss chapter 49, which is the final chapter. This is chapter 49, the final chapter in the Britney Spears book. And if you have made it this far, thank you so much for staying and listening to me. This chapter outlines how thankful she is to be free. Quote, "I've been taking it a day at a time and trying to be thankful for the little things. I'm thankful that my father is not in my life. I don't have to be scared of him anymore. If I gain weight, it's a relief to know that no one's going to be there shouting at me, 'You need to pick it up.' I get to eat chocolate again." She also says now that Jamie can't control what she eats, her body is getting stronger. Towards the very end of the chapter, she discusses that her and Sam got pregnant and she was just so excited about it that she announced it to the world. But by the end of the first trimester, she miscarried, and she writes out her Instagram caption from when that happened. She was obviously devastated, and she discusses that. A few things she says when she's wrapping up is, quote, "I try not to think too much about my family these days, but I do wonder what they'll think about this book." And she ends it with, quote, "It's been a while since I felt truly present in my own life, in my own power, in my own womanhood, but I'm here now." And then she has an acknowledgement section. So I'm just going to read that to you because it's a very short paragraph. Quote, "If you follow me on Instagram, you thought this book was going to be written in emojis, didn't you? Thank you to the team who worked so hard to help me bring my memoir into the world, including Kate Hudson, Matthew Rosengart, Kate Hoyt, my collaborators, you know who you are, Jennifer Bergstrom, Lauren Spiegel, and everyone at Gallery Books. Thank you to my fans. You have my heart and my gratitude forever. This book is for you." From me to you, thanks for following and listening.